All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're going to tackle a huge question, one that's at the very heart of political science. Who really runs the show in a country? Is it the people, some powerful hidden elite, or is it the government itself? And what you're going to see is that the answer, well, it changes dramatically depending on a nation's history.
So, here's what we're going to do. We'll start with that core question of power. Then, we'll dig into that classic idea of the state as a neutral referee. After that, we'll see why that model just doesn't work in a lot of post-colonial nations, explore some other theories, and then we'll wrap it all up by putting the two views side by side.
So, let's kick things off with the big one, right? The fundamental question that's at the heart of all of this, a question political thinkers have been wrestling with for ages.
So who's really calling the shots? Is it us, the voters, or is the real power concentrated in the hands of a few powerful groups lobbying behind the scenes? Or maybe, just maybe, the state itself, the bureaucracy, the military, is its own powerful force. To get our heads around this puzzle, let's start with a really common answer, one you see a lot in Western democracies.
And this brings us to what's known as the pluralist theory. Now, the best way to think about this is to picture the state as, well, as a kind of impartial referee in a sports game. Its job is just to make sure everybody plays fair. So the big idea here with pluralism is that society isn't this one big unified thing. Nope. It's more like a giant, sometimes chaotic, arena filled with all these different groups, all competing with each other. You've got unions fighting for better wages, big companies pushing for tax cuts, environmental groups trying to save the planet. You get the idea. In this view, no single group has all the power, and a state's job, it's just to be the neutral guy in the middle, managing all these competing demands. Okay, but it gets a little more complicated, as it always does. While the old-school classical pluralists saw a totally neutral state, the neo-pluralists came along and said, hang on a second, that's not quite right. They pointed out that in a capitalist economy, business interests have a kind of privileged position. They're not just another group. Their health is vital to the economy, which gives them a special in with the government. And get this, the state itself isn't just a passive referee. The people at the top, the bureaucrats and military leaders, can start acting like their own interest group, fighting for their own power and budgets.
All right, so that pluralist model, especially the newer version, it kind of works for a lot of Western countries. It makes sense. But what happens when you take that same playbook and try to use it somewhere with a totally different backstory?
Because when you start looking at a lot of countries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, that whole neutral referee idea it doesn't quite fit. It starts to fall apart. Instead of a referee balancing different teams, you often find a state that's not just in the game, it is the game. It's this massive, dominant force towering over everything else.
And here's the key idea to unlock this, a concept from a scholar named Hamza Alavi, the overdeveloped state. See, the thing is, these states weren't built from the ground up by their own people. They inherited this massive state machinery, an army, a police force, a bureaucracy, that was designed by colonial powers to do one thing, control the population and extract resources. So when the colonial powers left, that powerful machine was still there, but now there was no strong local group ready to take the reins.
So, this new reality meant we needed totally new ways of thinking. The old models just weren't cutting it. Political scientists had to go back to the drawing board to figure out the unique challenges these nations were facing.
One of the most important thinkers here was Samuel Huntington, and his analysis was pretty stark. He saw this really dangerous mismatch happening in a lot of these new nations. On one side, people were getting more involved, they had more demands for the government, but on the other side, the government institutions themselves were just too weak and fragile to handle it all. So what do you think happens when people's demands shoot up way faster than the government's ability to actually deliver? Well, Huntington had a name for it, political decay. This isn't just random chaos. It's a very specific problem where society is changing super fast, but the political system can't keep up. And the result? You get this constant instability, coups, unrest, conflict. It's a powerful way to explain the turmoil in so many developing countries. Okay, so that's one perspective. Another really interesting model came from a guy named Fred Riggs. He took a totally different approach, using some pretty creative language to describe what he saw happening in the governments of these developing nations. He came up with this idea of a prismatic society. Think of a prism splitting light into different colors. It's a mix of things. Let's walk through the three big features. First, heterogeneity. This is where you have a shiny, modern city that looks like it could be anywhere in the world, but drive an hour out and life is completely traditional, following ancient customs.
Second, you have formalism. This is the massive gap between the official rules, the laws written down on paper, and what actually happens on the ground. And finally, overlapping. This is where things get really messy. You've got a modern government office that's supposed to hire the best person for the job, but in reality, it's all about who you know, your family, your tribe, your religion.
All right, so we've looked at two really different pictures of how the state works, right? Let's just put them side by side so we can see the differences really pop.
Okay, let's just run through this. For the pluralist view, think stable democracies, the state is that neutral referee. Power, it's spread out among a bunch of competing groups, and the main goal is just to keep everyone reasonably happy by balancing interests. Now, flip over to the post-colonial view. The state's role is totally different. It's this overdeveloped machine left over from colonial times. Power isn't spread out, it's locked up with the military and bureaucratic elites. And the biggest challenge? Just trying to keep the whole thing from falling apart.
So what's the big takeaway from all of this? Well, it's pretty simple, but it's absolutely crucial. Context is everything. There's no single theory of the state that works everywhere. You can't just copy and paste a model that works for the UK and expect it to explain what's happening in Uganda. A country's specific, unique history, especially its experience with colonialism, fundamentally writes the rules of power today.
And that really leaves us with a fascinating question for the future, doesn't it? In our super-connected, globalized world, are these old divides going to stick around? Will we start to see countries move toward one model, or will we see new kinds of states emerge? Maybe some kind of hybrid we haven't even thought of yet. It's something to think about the next time you're watching the news.